Hey there. If you click this video, you're probably either curious about how to get a job at FEMA, or you've already applied to multiple postings on USAJobs and you're completely frustrated with the whole process, which is fair. Well, good news is I am here to answer all of your questions and bestow all of my knowledge upon you, viewer, for free. My name is Stephanie, and I worked at FEMA headquarters for 3.5 years until very recently. I have people reaching out to me all the time on LinkedIn or through friends, asking me for resume tips or simply, how do I get a job at FEMA? And as much as I love meeting people and answering these questions, I thought putting it all out there in a format like this would be the most helpful. There's a lot to cover, so I've made this into a 3-part video series. This first one will focus on the realities of working there, including the different types of jobs available, where FEMA is located, and what you can generally expect to do in each. No two jobs are even remotely the same at FEMA. I think it's really important to start with this. In the next video, I explain the different job classifications at FEMA, including the difference between permanent full-time and core positions, and how to find these positions on USAJobs. And the third video is all about resumes and interview tips. So let's jump in. When someone tells me they want to work at FEMA, my follow-up question is always, why? What do you want to do? And the majority of the time they say something like, oh, I want to travel to disasters and help people. So basically what they see on the news. And while yes, lots of people and jobs at FEMA do that, and you can do that, it's what we call field work. It's important to know that many of the positions on USAJobs are actually primarily desk jobs, where you're not doing this all the time. In fact, there's kind of this invisible line between jobs at FEMA that are primarily field jobs and those that are primarily desk jobs. And I'll refer to these two categories that I've made up a lot. If you're in a field job, your main purpose is to deploy to disasters, living out of a hotel and doing your one role. If you're in a desk job, your main purpose is to work on some behind-the-scenes project or program and support disaster operations. You may go to the field a lot, but most will only go sometimes. There are definitely exceptions to this, but by and large, that's just kind of the breakdown. And all of these jobs are important and contribute to the mission, but I know so many people at FEMA who are in desk jobs but want to do more field work and vice versa, and they didn't know this distinction coming in. To better illustrate, I'm going to start by explaining how FEMA is organized and where you get jobs, from furthest away from the field to closest, and the jobs associated with each. So let's start with headquarters. FEMA headquarters is located in Washington, D.C. And like any other corporate headquarters, it's very corporate-y. These are primarily desk jobs, focused on project management, policy writing, politicking, working on large, slow, multi-year initiatives. When a disaster happens, they pull headquarters people last to deploy to the disaster zone because they are busy literally running the agency and various programs that can't stop because of a disaster. If you have a supportive supervisor and you advocate for yourself, then you can for sure get to the field sometimes, like I was able to. Now, I do quickly want to explain that there's another way that HQ employees get activated to support disasters, and that's through the National Response Coordination Center, or NRCC. This is basically a federal level EOC, or Emergency Operations Center, where FEMA and federal partners staff a large room in FEMA headquarters to coordinate high-level requests from those on the ground. Let me iterate that FEMA headquarters does not run the disaster. The leaders in the field do. FEMA headquarters supports them. The NRCC isn't activated for every disaster, but lots of HQ people get to scratch that disaster response itch by doing this instead of deploying, especially those who don't want to travel. Next are what I call service and support centers that are located in various places around the country. If you get a job at any of these locations, they will also primarily be desk jobs, with some exceptions. These are either directly or indirectly linked to headquarters and usually serve a specific purpose. So within this category, we have call centers that are located in Hyattsville, Maryland, and Denton, Texas. FEMA has a couple of primary training facilities, one in Emmitsburg, Maryland, one in Alabama. There's also a kind of responder field support office called the Workforce Coordination Branch that's located in Pasadena. They help those who are currently deployed or deploying to the field and help resolve deployment issues. There's an IT logistics and finance support center in Winchester, Virginia. It's called the VDOC. They focus a lot on moving all of the technology assets to disasters to help set up different joint field offices and other logistical needs. And then there is Mount Weather, which is where FEMA has their continuity of operation stuff primarily, as well as some deployment things and other classified stuff that I don't know about because I've never actually been. I'm sure I'm missing some, but those are the main ones. Next are the regions. FEMA consists of 10 regions, each with a finite number of states or territories that they are responsible for. If you work for a region and a disaster happens in your region, you'll likely get some field experience, especially if you've worked to build relationships in the area that was affected. And this is where each regional headquarters office is located. You may be wondering what HQ does differently from a region. Well, as mentioned, headquarters is corporate, working on large, agency-wide, or nationally significant projects. Regions are focused on things that affect their states, like planning projects, mitigation outreach, trainings, or honestly, and most importantly, building and maintaining relationships with those states and territories. They're the link between the federal government and the states. In fact, if a state wants to declare a disaster, they first need to go through the regional headquarters and then up to FEMA headquarters and the president with the request. But not all regions are the same. If you're in a slow region, like 1 or 5, you might not get to go out as often. Also, regions have their own version of an NRCC, like I mentioned earlier, known as Regional Response Coordination Centers, that regional staff also supports during a disaster as well. So those were your primarily desk jobs. There's generally a building that you'll have to report to somewhere in the US, and you have projects or job functions that you do most of the year to possibly sometimes go to a disaster. Now let's talk about field jobs. As mentioned, if you have a field position, your main purpose at FEMA is to respond to disasters in the field. Many, if not most, of these individuals have never actually even seen FEMA headquarters or regional headquarters. So let's start with IM Core. IM stands for Incident Management, and I will explain core in the next video. But basically, those with this job title are full-time disaster responders and are expected to deploy to a disaster 75% of the year. In this role, you're hired to do a specific job in a disaster by one of FEMA's 23 cadres, or groups of employees organized by work function. For instance, you may get hired by the logistics cadre to be a warehouse manager. So every disaster you go to, you're going to be managing a warehouse. That's your job. There's a link in the description that explains cadres a little more, so feel free to check that out. Something to note, IM Core only makes up a small percentage of FEMA's workforce. So if you're looking to do this, there aren't many jobs. Next are reservists, which is in contrast one of the largest portions of FEMA's workforce. Reservists are essentially part-time IM Cores, or at least that's how I like to explain it. Same concept as IM Core is you will be hired for a specific role by one of the 23 cadres, and then you will deploy intermittently to disasters, or at least that's the goal. Disasters have gotten so frequent recently that reservists are often out as long as IM Cores. And while it's technically a part-time intermittent job, historically, reservists could not realistically hold a second job because when you deploy and for how long is so unpredictable. You don't often get a heads up to request leave. Generally, reservists are out for 2 to 3 months at a time, but they're often asked to be extended or quickly redeployed to another disaster. Many actually make this their full-time job. And last, I'll cover local hires. Just a quick caveat, I'm not as well versed in this employee type, but I'll explain what I know. Local hires are hired to augment a specific disaster temporarily. They generally look for individuals who are from the affected area, and they'll be hired anywhere from 4 months to a few years. For instance, when Hurricane Maria hit, they hired thousands of Puerto Ricans as local hires to help the island recover specifically from that disaster. A lot of them stuck around and are still here today. Okay, so I hope this gave you a better understanding of the reality of working at FEMA, including the different categories of jobs they hired, how some are very field heavy, some are desk heavy, and hopefully you've identified one or more that you might want to pursue. In the next video, I'm going to explain the different job classifications, including what's a permanent full-time versus a core employee. What does that mean? I'll go over pay bands, salary, benefits, and then also how to search, find, and translate these positions on USA Jobs. So thanks for watching and see you in the next one.